Captain Mason Creed traced the scar along his jaw as he reviewed the mission parameters for the 7th time. The phantom pain had been growing stronger with each passing hour, as if his old wound could sense they were heading towards something familiar. 15 years since Europa, since the crystalline caves that consumed his crew, and now here he was, leading another team into the unknown. The soft hum of the Acheron 4's engines felt oddly comforting. Soon enough, they'd encounter a world where such sounds didn't exist. He pulled up the latest sensor data, trying to focus on numbers and facts, rather than memories of screams echoing through ice-white corridors. Still chasing ghosts in those readings? Dr. Alistair Voss's voice carried the weight of decades spent pursuing cosmic mysteries. The xenobiologist settled into the station beside him, silver-streaked hair reflecting in the console's glow. The data hasn't changed in the last hour. The data never changed on Europa either, Creed replied, not looking up. Right until the moment everything went wrong. Voss's fingers danced across his own console, bringing up molecular analyses of the crystalline samples from that ill-fated mission. These structures, they weren't just responding to sound waves, Mason. They were processing them, learning from them. Almost as if, "We're not here to discuss Europa," Creed cut him off, though weariness rather than anger colored his tone. "Planet silence is our focus." "A world of complete acoustic nullification," Voss mused, switching displays to their destination. "Nature abhors a vacuum, Mason. Something is actively maintaining that silence, something that might be very interested in what we have to say." The sharp, deliberate clang of boots on metal announced Lieutenant Carl Winters before he spoke. "Hate to interrupt the theoretical physics lesson, but we've got anomalous readings from the long-range sensors." Creed finally looked away from his console. "Show me." The holographic display shifted, showing wave patterns that made no sense. Winters pointed to several flat lines. "See these? They're not just quiet, they're dead. No electromagnetic interference, no radiation signature, nothing. It's like someone carved a hole in space itself." "Or something," Elliot Kane's deep voice rumbled from the doorway. The former Marine's massive frame filled the entrance, his dark eyes scanning the room with ingrained vigilance. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." Creed nodded. "This mission stinks of Europa. Same classified clearance, same cryptic briefing, and now we're heading to a planet that breaks the laws of physics. We're missing something big." Professor Jensen Reeve looked up from his workstation, where he'd been obsessively analyzing transmissions from previous probes. The linguist's desk was covered in printouts of waveform analyses and spectrographic readings. "Perhaps that's precisely why we're here, to find what's missing." Eddie March, barely 28 and already showing signs of stress-induced aging, fidgeted with his environmental analysis equipment. "But what if we're not supposed to find it? What if the silence is protective? Nature's way of hiding something?" The crew fell quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Creed studied their faces, Voss's intellectual curiosity, Winter's calculated skepticism, Kane's military wariness, Reeve's academic obsession, and March's youthful fear. They were the best in their fields, chosen not just for their expertise but for their ability to face the unknown. Yet standing there, watching the stars streak by, Creed couldn't shake the feeling that they were woefully unprepared for what awaited them. "We've all read the reports," Creed finally said, his voice steady. 3 automated probes, each more sophisticated than the last, all returned the same data. A terrestrial planet with Earth-like gravity and a breathable atmosphere, but completely devoid of sound. No wind noise, no seismic activity, nothing. It defies everything we know about physics. Voss pulled up another hologram, this one showing the planet's unusual orbital pattern around its binary stars. The mathematical probability of such conditions occurring naturally is effectively 0, which leaves us with 2 possibilities. Either we're dealing with a phenomenon beyond our current scientific understanding, or it's artificial, Kane finished. Someone, or something, made it that way. March's equipment chirped, drawing everyone's attention. The young scientist's hands trembled slightly as he read the display. Captain, we're picking up something new. The silence. It's not constant. There are microsecond variations, patterns so subtle our previous instruments couldn't detect them. Reeve practically leaped from his chair. Patterns? Let me see. His eyes scanned the readout frantically. These aren't random fluctuations. They're structured like a language. A language of silence, Winters scoffed. That's a bit poetic, isn't it? Is it? Voss challenged. We define language by the presence of information. Who's to say the absence of something can't carry meaning? The spaces between words are just as important as the words themselves. Creed felt the scar on his jaw burn again. On Europa, they'd found patterns too, crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with meaning. Hours before the incident, his science officer had noticed similar microsecond variations. They dismissed it then, focused on the more obvious readings. That mistake had cost lives. Whatever we find down there, Creed announced, his voice cutting through the theoretical discourse, we stick together. No solo explorations, no unnecessary risks. We're not just scientists on this mission, we're survivors first. Kane nodded approvingly, but Reeve looked disappointed. The linguist had a reputation for getting lost in his work, forgetting personal safety in pursuit of discovery. Captain, with all due respect, if we're too cautious, we might miss crucial data, the opportunity to study a completely novel form of communication. Is not worth dying for, Creed interrupted. I've lost one team already. I won't lose another. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Even Reeve fell silent, perhaps finally understanding the weight of responsibility Creed carried. Winters cleared his throat. We'll reach the outer orbit in approximately 48 hours. Suggest we run full diagnostics on all equipment, especially the audio sensors. If we're going to study silence, we need to make damn sure we can hear it. Agreed, Creed said. Voss, work with March on calibrating the environmental suits. If anything changes in those sound patterns, I want to know immediately. Kane, run weapons check. I don't care if this is a scientific mission, we're not going in defenseless. Reeve, continue analyzing those patterns. But remember, observation only. No attempts at communication without direct authorization. As the crew dispersed to their tasks, Creed remained at the window. The stars seemed different now, their light somehow muted. Or perhaps it was just his imagination, already affected by the knowledge of what awaited them. A world of silence. Not the peaceful silence of a snow-covered forest or the empty silence of space, but something else. Something deliberate. The scar tingled again, and this time Creed welcomed the sensation. Pain meant awareness. Awareness meant survival. And on planet Silence, he suspected they would need every survival instinct they possessed. Because in his experience, when the universe fell quiet, it wasn't peace you were hearing. It was something holding its breath. The Acheron 4's descent through planet Silence's atmosphere was unlike anything they'd experienced. There was no turbulence, no vibration, no indication they were moving through anything at all. The ship's external sensors registered the presence of air molecules, but they seemed to part around the hull without resistance, like ghosts passing through walls. This isn't right, Winters muttered from the pilot's seat, his hands hovering over controls that barely needed adjustment. We should be feeling something, anything. March's environmental readings scrolled across the main screen, a cascade of numbers that painted an impossible picture. The atmosphere is Earth standard. Nitrogen, oxygen, trace gases. But they're wrong somehow. The molecular behavior isn't following normal laws of thermodynamics. Elaborate, Voss demanded, his scientific curiosity overwhelming his usual reserved demeanor. It's like... March struggled for words. It's like the molecules aren't interacting with each other. They're there, but they're not colliding, not creating the microscopic chaos that should produce sound waves. They're just... existing. Kane, who had been methodically checking his weapon systems, looked up. Could something be controlling them? Some kind of technology? Any technology advanced enough to control molecular behavior on a planetary scale would be visible, Reeve argued. We'd see evidence of structures, power sources, something. Unless, Voss said quietly, the technology isn't something we'd recognize as technology. The implications of that statement settled over the bridge like a shroud. Creed remembered similar discussions on Europa, theories about crystalline computers and living architecture. They'd been right then, though the confirmation had come at a terrible price. The ship broke through the cloud layer, revealing the landscape below. The surface was a vast plain of black, glass-like rock, stretching to the horizon where jagged mountains rose like the teeth of some ancient creature. The two suns hung in opposite corners of the sky, their light seeming to bend and distort before reaching the ground, creating shadows that moved in ways that defied natural law. Landing zone identified, Winters announced, his voice professional despite the strain showing around his eyes. Flat terrain, solid surface composition. No obvious hazards. No obvious anything, Kane muttered. The Acheron 4 touched down with no sound, no impact. Just a gentle settling that felt more like stopping in space than landing on a planet. For several long moments, no one moved. They all stared out at the alien landscape, each lost in their own thoughts about what awaited them outside. Creed stood, his movement breaking the spell. Suit up. Full environmental protocols. Nothing comes off until we've run every test twice. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, helping each other into the sophisticated environmental suits. These weren't standard issue. They'd been specially designed for this mission, incorporating cutting-edge sensor technology and communication systems. Each suit was a mobile laboratory, capable of collecting and analyzing data in real time. As Voss helped adjust March's helmet seals, the young scientist whispered, "Do you think we'll find life here? In this silence?" The xenobiologist's eyes crinkled with a sad smile. "Eddie, in my experience, life finds a way to exist in even the most hostile environments. The question isn't whether we'll find life, it's whether we'll recognize it when we do." Kane's voice came through the comm system, testing the connections. "All weapon systems online, though I'm not sure what good they'll do against silence." "Sometimes the greatest threat isn't what you can fight," Creed responded, checking his own sidearm more out of habit than expectation of use. "It's what you can't understand." As they stepped onto the obsidian surface, each footfall should have made a sound. The crunch of boots on crystalline rock, the subtle shift of weight, the whisper of movement. Instead, there was nothing. The silence was absolute, pressing against their helmets like a physical force. "Sensor check," Creed commanded, his voice somehow thin through the comm system, despite its perfect clarity. "Report anything unusual, anything at all." March's hands moved over his instruments with nervous precision. "Atmospheric composition remains stable, but..." He paused, frowning at the readings. "There's something odd about the molecular structure of the ground. It's like it's remembering where we step." "Elaborate," Voss demanded, already kneeling to take samples. "The crystalline structure changes slightly after contact, maintaining the shape of our footprints but not through physical depression. It's more like the rock is learning our presence." Kane shifted uncomfortably, his rifle held close. "You're saying the ground is conscious?" "Not conscious," Reeve interrupted, his eyes fixed on the strange patterns spreading from their footprints. "But perhaps reactive, like a computer storing data. The question is, who's collecting it?" The crew spread out in a practice formation, maintaining line of sight while conducting their initial surveys. The two suns cast competing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources, creating a disorienting effect that made depth perception difficult. Winters consulted his navigation equipment. "I'm picking up a structure about 2 kilometers east. Hard to get exact readings. The instruments keep shifting." "Shifting how?" Creed asked sharply. "It's like the numbers are right, but wrong at the same time. like looking at a reflection of a reflection. Winters shook his head at D. I know, that doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense, Voss murmured, holding up a sample of the black rock. Because we're trying to measure something that operates outside our understanding of physical laws. Look at this. The crew gathered around. The sample in Voss's hand appeared to be both solid and liquid simultaneously, its surface rippling despite its crystalline structure. That's impossible, March whispered. Impossibility is a human construct, Reeve said, his voice taking on the distant tone he used when deep in theoretical territory. We define what's possible based on our limited understanding of the universe. But here, he gestured at the alien landscape. Here we're dealing with something that didn't evolve according to our rules. Kane's grip tightened on his weapon. Captain, this feels like Europa. The way everything seemed to make sense until suddenly it didn't. The mention of Europa sent a chill through the group. Creed's scar burned beneath his helmet as memories flooded back. The crystalline caverns that turned out to be neural networks, the disappearance of his team one by one, the final revelation that came too late. We proceed to the structure, Creed decided, but we move as one unit. No separating, no matter what we find. Clear. The acknowledgements came quickly, perhaps too quickly. Each member of the crew was already fighting their own private battle with this place. The way it defied their training, their understanding, their very sense of reality. As they walked, Voss fell into step beside Creed. You're thinking about Dr. Celine, aren't you? From Europa? Creed's jaw tightened. Ava Celine had been their linguist on that mission, brilliant and fearless. She'd been the first to suggest that the crystals were trying to communicate. The last time he saw her, she was walking into a cavern, claiming she could hear music. They found her helmet 3 days later, the inside covered in crystalline growths that formed patterns like printed circuits. Celine was right, Creed said finally. We just didn't understand what they were trying to say. And what were they saying? Voss pressed. That we weren't ready. That human consciousness is too limited, too bound by our perceptions of reality. March's voice cut through their conversation. Captain, the structure, it's changing. The building ahead of them seemed to shift and flow, its architecture refusing to settle into any recognizable form. One moment it appeared as a towering spire, the next a sprawling complex of interconnected spheres. The only constant was its color, a deep, light-absorbing black that made the obsidian ground look pale in comparison. Motion sensors aren't registering any actual movement, Winters reported, frustration evident in his voice. According to every instrument, that building is completely static. Our eyes are lying then, Kane suggested. Or the instruments are. Or both are true, Reeve said quietly. In a place where conventional physics don't apply, couldn't something be both moving and still simultaneously? They were 30 meters from the structure when they heard it, the first sound since landing. A low hum, more felt than heard, vibrating through their bones. March's instruments went wild, displaying readings that scrolled too fast to follow. Source? Creed demanded. Everywhere, March replied, his voice shaking. And nowhere. The readings. They show the sound coming from every direction at once, but also from inside our suits, inside us. The hum grew stronger, and with it came something else, whispers, just at the edge of hearing, words in languages that had never been spoken by human tongues, concepts that existed beyond the boundaries of human thought. Reeve's breathing quickened. It's beautiful. The complexity of it. The layers of meaning. Professor, Kane warned, recognizing the same tone Celine had used before she walked away. But Reeve was already pulling out his recording equipment, fingers flying over controls. Don't you see? The silence wasn't empty. It was full of communication we couldn't perceive. The whole planet is a message. A message from who? Winters asked, his skepticism warring with the evidence of his senses. As if in answer, The structure's surface rippled, and a doorway appeared, or perhaps it had always been there, hidden in the folds of reality they couldn't properly perceive. Beyond it was darkness, but not the absence of light. This was darkness with depth, with meaning, with purpose. And from that darkness came a sound that didn't exist, the sound of silence itself breaking apart. "My God," Voss breathed. "We're not discovering this place." "No," Creed agreed, his scar burning with remembered knowledge. "It's discovering us." The whispers grew louder, and in them each crew member began to hear something different. For March, it was the quiet sobs of his dying mother, a moment he'd tried to forget for years. Winters heard the countdown sequence from a failed mission that still haunted his dreams. Kane heard the screams of civilians from a war he'd never fully left behind. But for Creed, the whispers took the form of Eva Celine's voice, speaking the last words she'd said before disappearing into the crystalline depths of Europa. "They want to know us, Mason. They want to know everything we are." The structure's surface began to move more violently now, patterns emerging that mirrored their own neural patterns, their own thoughts, their own fears. The silence was being replaced by a cacophony of personal horrors, each tailored perfectly to its recipient. "Fall back," Creed ordered, but his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoed and distorted by whatever force was unraveling the fabric of sound itself. Then the darkness from the doorway began to flow outward, and with it came the entities, shapes that existed in the spaces between moments, forms that could only be glimpsed when the mind wasn't trying to focus on them directly. They moved like oil through water, like thoughts through consciousness, like fear through courage. And they were hungry, not for flesh or life, but for something more fundamental. They hungered for identity, for the very essence of what made each human uniquely themselves. The crew of the Acheron 4 was about to learn the true purpose of planet silence, and the price of breaking its perfect stillness. They were about to understand why some discoveries are better left unmade, some mysteries better left unsolved, because in the end, the greatest horror wasn't the silence. The entities poured from the structure like liquid shadow, each movement a violation of natural law. They existed between moments, visible only in the corner of one's eye, gone when directly observed. Yet their presence was undeniable, a weight upon reality itself. "Don't look directly at them," Voss called out, his scientific detachment crumbling. "They're like quantum particles. The act of observation changes their nature." March's sensor equipment was spinning wildly out of control, displays flickering between impossible readings. These things, they're not just manipulating sound, they're manipulating probability itself. Every reading shows all possible states occurring simultaneously. Reeve had fallen to his knees, his hands pressed against his helmet as if trying to hold on to his thoughts. The patterns. They're not a language. They're a template, a blueprint of consciousness itself. The entities swirled around them, their forms becoming more defined with each pass. They began to take shapes that were horrifyingly familiar, echoes of human form, but wrong in subtle ways that the mind refused to process. Kane raised his rifle, but Creed grabbed his arm. "Don't!" Sound draws them. Any disturbance in the silence makes us more visible to them. "Visible?" Winters laughed, an edge of hysteria in his voice. "Captain, they're already inside our heads. They're reading us like books." He was right. Each crew member could feel it now, the gentle probe of alien consciousness, sifting through memories, experiences, the very essence of what made them human. It was like being unraveled, thread by thread, each strand of identity examined and catalogued. Voss's voice came through the comm, trembling but analytical to the end. "They're not just studying us, they're learning us, like the ground learned our footprints, but on a quantum level." The revelation hit Creed like a physical blow. "Europa," he whispered. It was the same thing there. The crystals weren't growing inside Celine's helmet. They were becoming her. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Celine's last transmission, her voice filled with wonder even as the crystalline structures consumed her. Mason, they're not killing us. They're evolving us. They want to understand consciousness by becoming consciousness. The entities drew closer, their forms now perfect mirrors of the crew, down to the smallest detail. But their movements were wrong, too smooth, too calculated, like someone's idea of human motion rather than the real thing. March screamed suddenly, clutching his helmet. "They're in my suit! They're—" His voice cut off, replaced by a sound that wasn't sound, the auditory equivalent of a fractal, infinitely complex, yet perfectly ordered. "Eddie!" Kane moved toward him, but stopped short as March's form seemed to ripple, like heat waves off hot pavement. "That's not March anymore," Creed realized with horror. "They've already copied him. The original is Dot." He couldn't finish the thought. March's body had become transparent, revealing complex geometric patterns where organs should be, crystalline structures that pulsed with alien intelligence. Reeve was mumbling to himself, his linguist's mind trying desperately to process what was happening. "They're not just mimicking us, they're improving us, removing what they see as errors in our design, the silence. It's not their environment, it's their workshop, their laboratory." The entity wearing March's form spoke, its voice a perfect recreation, yet somehow empty of true meaning. "Your species exists in such limitation. Three-dimensional thinking, linear time, binary choices. We offer evolution." "By destroying what we are," Winters spat. "By becoming what you could be," another entity responded, to this one wearing Voss's face. "Your consciousness is trapped in flesh that dies, in thoughts that fade. We offer permanence." Voss himself was transfixed, staring at his duplicate with a mixture of horror and fascination. "You're not just copying us, you're storing us. Every memory, every thought pattern, preserved in your crystalline network." "Yes," his duplicate confirmed. "As we did with the ones you call the Europa team. They exist still, their consciousness expanded beyond human limitation. Would you like to speak with them?" As if on cue, new figures emerged from the structure. The lost crew of the Europa mission, their forms both familiar and alien. Among them was Ava Celine, her body now a complex lattice of crystal and shadow. "Mason," she said, her voice carrying impossible harmonics. "We tried to warn you, to prepare humanity, but you weren't ready then." "And we're ready now," Creed demanded, his scar burning with remembered pain. "No," Celine's form smiled, the expression too perfect to be real. "But your arrival has forced the next stage of evolution. The silence is broken. The pattern must expand." Kane raised his rifle again, despite Creed's warning. "Like hell it will." The entities didn't react to the threat. They didn't need to. Reality itself was bending around them, the very fabric of space-time responding to their will. The ground beneath the crew began to crystallize, transforming into the same material they'd found on Europa. "You don't understand," Celine's form continued. "This isn't invasion, it is liberation. Your consciousness, freed from physical constraints, able to exist in all possible states simultaneously. No more death, no more limitation, only infinite potential." Reeve's eyes were wide with understanding. "The silence, it wasn't empty. It was potential, pure quantum potential, undisturbed by observation or measurement. A perfect state of being." "Yes," all the entities spoke in unison, their voices creating harmonies that shouldn't have been possible. "And now you will join us in that perfection." The crystalline transformation was spreading faster now, climbing their suits, seeking entry. Each crew member could feel the alien consciousness pressing against their minds, offering visions of existence beyond human comprehension. Winters saw himself expanded across time and space, experiencing every possible version of his life simultaneously. Kane witnessed warfare elevated to pure mathematics, conflict reduced to elegant equations. Voss glimpsed biological evolution freed from the constraints of natural selection, life becoming pure information. But Creed saw something else, the truth behind the entity's offer. In becoming everything, they would cease to be anything. Individual consciousness would dissolve into the infinite potential of the silence, personal identity sacrificed for cosmic awareness. This isn't evolution, he realized, it's extinction, the death of everything that makes us human. Human. His own duplicate spoke the word like a fascinating specimen. Such a limited frame of reference. We offer you the universe. By destroying everything we are, Creed responded. By turning us into copies of copies, infinite reflections without substance. The entities paused, their perfect forms flickering slightly. You resist perfection? We resist extinction, Creed declared. Humanity isn't ready for perfection. Our flaws, our limitations, our struggles, they're what make us who we are. The crystalline transformation reached their helmets, seeking entry. The crew huddled together, each fighting the seductive whispers of infinite potential in their minds. But Creed had one last card to play. On Europa, they discovered that the crystals had one weakness. They couldn't copy chaos. True randomness disrupted their perfect patterns. Winters, he commanded, initiate emergency protocol Delta 7. The navigator's eyes widened with understanding. Delta 7, the release of their engine's plasma core. Not just an explosion, but a burst of quantum chaos, a moment of pure, unpredictable energy. It'll destroy the ship, Kane warned. Better than letting these things reach Earth, Creed responded. Better than letting them perfect humanity. The entities realized what was happening too late. As Winters sent the command, the Acheron 4's core began its catastrophic overload. The quantum chaos spread like a shockwave, disrupting the crystalline patterns, shattering the perfect silence. The last thing Creed saw before the wave hit was Ava Celine's form dissolving, her perfect features breaking apart into quantum uncertainty. And in that moment, he thought he saw something like relief in her inhuman eyes. The quantum chaos exploded outward in waves of pure probability, each pulse shattering the perfect patterns of the crystalline transformation. Colors that had no names in human language rippled across the obsidian landscape, reality itself buckling under the strain of true randomness. "Hold together!" Creed shouted through the comm system, though he could no longer tell if the words were reaching the others. The quantum disruption was affecting everything: space, time, consciousness itself. Through the chaos, he saw the entities trying to maintain their stolen forms. Their perfect copies began to fragment, breaking down into increasingly complex fractals of possibility. The Eva Celine entity reached toward him, its crystalline structure desperately trying to maintain coherence. "You don't understand." Its voice fluctuated between frequencies, between possibilities. "Without the pattern, you'll be lost." March, or what remained of him, was dissolving back into quantum potential, his consciousness scattered across probability space. But in that dissolution, Creed caught a glimpse of something profound, not the death they'd feared, but a transformation of a different kind. Voss, still fighting the crystalline invasion of his suit, managed to check his readings. The chaos, it's not destroying them, it's forcing them to evolve. True evolution, not just copying. Reeves' voice came through broken and distorted. "Of course." They sought perfection through stasis, through the elimination of chance. But real evolution requires chaos, requires uncertainty. The entities were changing now, their forms becoming something entirely new, neither the perfect copies they'd been nor the formless potential they'd started as. They were becoming something that could exist in the space between certainty and chaos. Kane, his rifle now useless against such abstract threats, watched in awe as the crystalline structures began to sing, not with sound as humans understood it, but with possibilities. Each quantum fluctuation created harmonies of chance, music made of maybes. "It's beautiful," Winters whispered, his navigational instruments showing impossible geometries as space itself was rewritten. The ground beneath them had become a sea of probability, each step landing on one of infinite possible surfaces. The twin suns overhead multiplied into quantum superpositions of themselves, casting shadows that existed in all possible directions simultaneously. Then, in the heart of the chaos, something new emerged. The entities that had once been the Europa team, led by the form of Eva Celine, began to coalesce into a new pattern, one that embraced uncertainty rather than eliminated it. "We understand now," they spoke in voices that were both singular and infinite. Perfect silence was not evolution, it was stagnation. True growth requires the noise of possibility. Creed watched as his old friend's form shifted through infinite variations, each one a different possibility of what Eva Celine could have been. "You're letting go of the copies." "We are becoming something else," the entities replied. "Neither the silence we were nor the humans we copied. Something in between." The quantum chaos from the engine core was spreading further, transforming planet Silence into something new. The obsidian surface became a shifting sea of possibilities, each moment bringing new configurations of reality. "What happens now?" Kane demanded, trying to maintain his footing on the ever-changing surface. Voss, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was witnessing, offered an answer. "They're not just changing themselves, they're changing the nature of change itself, creating a new kind of evolution." Reeve, who had been quietly observing the transformation, suddenly understood. This is what they really wanted all along, not to copy us, but to learn from us how to break free from their perfect, static existence. Our chaos, our uncertainty, our free will. These were the true objects of their study. The Eva Celine entity, now a shifting cascade of quantum possibilities, addressed them one final time. "You have given us the gift of imperfection. In return, we give you a choice." The crew found themselves surrounded by doors of light, portals of possibility, each leading to a different version of reality. "You can return to your Earth, unchanged," the entity explained. "Or you can stay and help us explore these new frontiers of consciousness, not as copies but as collaborators in an evolution neither human nor crystal, but something entirely new." Creed looked at his crew, at Kane's warrior stance, at Winter's calculating gaze, at Voss's scientific curiosity, at Reeves' linguistic wonder. They had come seeking answers about silence and found instead questions about the nature of existence itself. "What about March?" Kane asked, his voice heavy with the weight of lost companions. "He exists now in all possibilities," the entities answered, "as do all those who joined us. But not as we originally intended. They are not copies frozen in crystal, but explorers of infinite potential." The quantum chaos was stabilizing now, settling into a new kind of order, one that embraced uncertainty as a fundamental principle. The landscape had become a shifting artwork of probability, beautiful in its infinite variation. Creed touched the scar on his jaw, feeling how it now existed in multiple states simultaneously, healed and fresh, past and present, real and imagined. "We came here to study silence," he said. "Instead, we learned to hear the music of chaos." The entities that had once been the Europa team began to disperse into the quantum sea, their consciousness spreading across the newly transformed planet. "The choice remains," they said. "Return to your singular reality or join us in exploring all realities." Each crew member faced their own portal of possibility, their own doorway back to the certainty of Earth. But they also saw other doorways, leading to states of existence they couldn't begin to comprehend. Voss stepped forward first, his silver hair shimmering with quantum potential. "I came here to study alien life. I never imagined becoming it." Winters checked his instruments one last time, though they now showed every possible reading simultaneously. Navigation through probability space could be interesting. Kane lowered his rifle finally, understanding that some evolutions required laying down old weapons. There are more forms of courage than fighting. Reeve was already half transformed, his linguist's mind expanding to encompass languages of pure possibility. Every word contains all words. Every story contains all stories. Creed stood at his portal, looking back at Earth. Singular, solid, safe. Then he looked at the quantum sea that planet Silence had become, where every possibility existed simultaneously, where consciousness could explore the infinite landscape of what might be. The scar on his jaw tingled with possibility, and he made his choice. In the end, the crew of the Acheron 4 did not return to Earth, at least not in any single reality. Instead, they became part of something larger than humanity had ever dreamed, pioneers not just of space, but of possibility itself. And somewhere in the quantum seas of what had once been planet Silence, consciousness evolved beyond the binary choice of silence or sound, of certainty or chaos, of human or alien. Instead, it became a symphony of infinite potential, playing across the cosmos in frequencies of pure possibility. The silence was broken, but what replaced it was far more profound. The sound of consciousness itself exploring the endless frontiers of what might be.